The worst part wasn't the nausea. It wasn't the hollow feeling in her arms or the way the store lights felt too bright, like they were pressing down on her skull. It was the simple fact that she needed food, and even that felt like a negotiation with her body. She stood near the fruit bins, one hand gripping the edge of the cart, the other hovering over a pile of apples. Everything smelled sweet and wrong at the same time. Her stomach rolled. She told herself to breathe. Just grab something bland. Just survive the next 5 minutes. That's when she felt it. The stare, not the quick glance people give out of curiosity. This was slower, heavier, the kind that lingers too long and pretends to be concerned. She didn't turn right away. She already knew the look. She'd been seeing it for months. "Sweetheart," a voice said, close enough to feel invasive. "Are you doing all right?" She forced a polite smile. The automatic one. The one that keeps strangers moving. "I'm okay." She hoped that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The woman stepped closer. Late 50s, neat posture, cart filled with things that suggested control, vitamins, sparkling water, perfectly stacked produce. The kind of person who believed effort solved most problems. "Well," the woman continued, lowering her voice like they were sharing a secret, "I don't mean this unkindly, but you look very tired. A little washed out. Here it comes." The narrator in her head went quiet. Her body went cold. That familiar freeze settled in, the one that came when she didn't have the energy to fight or explain or perform gratitude. The woman gestured vaguely toward her head. "A touch of makeup can really change how people see you. There are lovely wigs now, very natural. And it's important to try, men notice these things, whether they say it or not." Time stretched. The store noise faded into a dull hum. She thought about the morning she'd woken up to hair on her pillow, about the clumps in the shower drain, about the scale numbers dropping too fast, about the metallic taste that never left her mouth. She thought about how tired she was of pretending none of that existed. Her heart pounded once. Hard, then everything settled. She turned. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile either. "I have advanced colon cancer," she said evenly. "The treatment did this." The woman blinked. She went on calm, precise. "I'm standing here trying to find food that won't make me throw up in this aisle. That's my big goal today." The silence between them was sharp. "And just so you know," she added, meeting the woman's eyes, "my husband looks at me like I'm still myself. That's enough for me." The color drained from the woman's face. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Words tumbled out, rushed and thin. An apology. Too quick, too loud, the kind that comes from panic, not reflection. "I didn't know," she said. "I'm so sorry." I truly didn't mean. She stopped herself, already backing away. Her hands fumbled with the cart handle. She turned abruptly, abandoning it right there, groceries half chosen, and hurried down the aisle like the floor might swallow her. The sound of her shoes echoed, then disappeared. The cart stayed. People stared now. Someone pretended to check oranges. Another shopper avoided eye contact entirely. The moment rippled outward, uncomfortable and unresolved. She stood there, breathing slowly, her hands shaking just enough to notice. She hadn't planned that. There was no speech rehearsed in the mirror. No fantasy of triumph. Just a line she'd crossed internally where silence felt heavier than honesty. A strange mix of emotions hit all at once. Relief, guilt, a quiet, stubborn pride. Part of her wondered if she'd gone too far, if she should have softened it, if she'd made someone's day worse for no reason. Then another thought followed, steadier. Why was it ever her responsibility to cushion someone else's assumptions? She picked up an apple and turned it in her hand. It felt solid, real. She realized something then. The woman hadn't been cruel. She'd been careless. And carelessness, unchecked, spreads. People see bodies and think they know stories. They offer advice no one asked for. They comment as if survival were an aesthetic choice. Today, that assumption had collided with reality. She placed the apple in her cart and moved on, slower now, but steadier. Behind her, an abandoned cart waited in the aisle, silent proof that some lessons arrive without warning and leave no receipt. And for the first time that day, she felt lighter. Not because she'd embarrassed someone, But because she hadn't disappeared to make them comfortable, that mattered. The post exploded overnight. Not because it was heartfelt, not because it was tragic, but because it was loud, bitter, and completely unaware of itself. The man wrote like someone who expected sympathy to arrive on demand. He said his life had been destroyed, said he'd been betrayed, said his wife had vanished and dumped 5 children in his lap like unwanted luggage. According to him, it came out of nowhere. He explained how he'd supported her education, how he'd sponsored her move overseas, how he'd given her everything. The tone wasn't loving, it was transactional, like he was reading from a receipt and demanding a refund. Then he got to the part that mattered. He admitted he'd asked for a divorce. He said it casually, almost proudly, framed it like a reasonable decision. He told her he wanted space, told her he planned to move out, told her he needed freedom. In his mind, the next step was obvious. She would stay. She would manage the house. She would raise the children. He would start over. That's how it works. At least, that's how he believed it worked. He described her reaction as unsettling. No tears, no shouting, no pleading, just a nod. A calm acceptance that made him uneasy. He thought she was bluffing, processing, waiting for reality to sink in. Reality did sink in, just not for her. The very next day, she was gone. No dramatic goodbye. No angry messages. No confrontation. She boarded a flight back to West Africa, left the country quietly, and took the children's travel documents with her. The kids stayed, all 5 of them suddenly. His post took a sharp turn. The tone shifted from confident to frantic. He accused her of being heartless, claimed she'd planned it, called her manipulative, claimed she'd drained accounts, blamed her relatives, blamed her culture, blamed anyone except the man who'd asked for the divorce. He kept repeating one line, as if volume could make it true. Raising children, he said, is women's work. That sentence detonated the comments. People started connecting dots he'd left in plain sight. He'd wanted out first. He'd announced it. He'd packed his freedom in advance. He'd just assumed the burden would stay behind, neatly contained in the person he no longer wanted. What shocked him wasn't abandonment. It was symmetry. She didn't fight the exit. She matched it. As the thread grew, his anger sharpened. He wasn't grieving a marriage. He was furious about timing. Furious that he hadn't been the one to walk away clean. Furious that freedom now came with school runs, meals, schedules, and questions he couldn't ignore between the insults and the accusations. Something else slipped through. Fear. He talked about exhaustion, about not knowing how to manage mornings, about how loud the house felt, about how trapped he suddenly was. Each complaint revealed the same truth. He'd never imagined this version of independence. Meanwhile, her silence did all the talking. No rebuttal, no public defense, no counterpost, just absent, strategic, and complete. The comments stopped being kind. They became precise. People pointed out the contradiction he kept dancing around. He wanted to leave and was outraged she let him. He expected sacrifice and was stunned to be handed responsibility instead by the end. The narrative flipped. The man who thought he'd been wronged looked small, not because he was struggling, but because he'd assumed struggle was beneath him. The woman he called cruel became something else entirely. Not a villain, not a saint, just someone who refused to carry a role she never agreed to play alone. The post stayed up for a few days. Then it vanished. No update, no resolution, no apology, but the lesson lingered. If you announce you're walking away, don't be shocked when the other person opens the door first. The warning signs didn't arrive loudly. They crept in quietly, wrapped in concern, disguised as loyalty. It started with the way the house felt off. Too still, too closed. Her son was always there. Her daughter was never anywhere else. He was 18 now, recently sober. Fragile in that way, recovery makes you. Every bad day hit him hard. Every setback sent him spiraling. And somehow, without anyone naming it, his 14-year-old sister became the place he landed. Always beside him, always listening, always canceling her own plans because he needed her. At first, it looked like siblings being close. Hugs that lasted a second too long. Late nights talking behind closed doors. Inside jokes she stopped sharing with anyone else. She stopped going out. Stopped answering friends' messages. Stopped acting like a kid. That's when the thoughts started. Forming in their mother's head, this isn't right. She tried to reason it away. He's healing. She's kind. They've been through a lot. Single parenting leaves gaps. Kids fill them however they can, but the gaps kept growing. He leaned on her for comfort instead of adults. She soothed his panic, regulated his moods, shielded him from consequences. When he struggled, she stepped in like it was her job to keep him stable. And that scared her, because siblings can support each other. They are not meant to hold each other up. The turning point came one afternoon when the daughter skipped something she'd been excited about for weeks. Not because she was sick, not because of homework, because her brother wasn't having a good day. The mother felt it then. That drop in the stomach, that quiet alarm. She didn't accuse. She didn't explode. She did the hardest thing instead. She created distance. She told her son he'd be staying with his grandmother for a while. A pause, a reset. Time to breathe. Time to untangle things that had knotted too tightly. The reaction was immediate. Family members called her dramatic, said she was projecting, said siblings being close was a blessing, said she was punishing a recovering addict who needed love. But none of them lived in that house. None of them watched a 14-year-old slowly disappear into responsibility that wasn't hers. None of them saw how the balance of power had shifted, how one child's recovery had quietly started to cost the other her childhood. The son was angry, confused, hurt. He didn't understand why the person he leaned on most was suddenly out of reach. Point recovery built on the shoulders of a child isn't recovery, it's displacement. As the days passed, something changed. The daughter started sleeping better. She laughed more. She reconnected with friends. She felt lighter without being on call for someone else's emotions. The house exhaled online. When the story surfaced, strangers saw what relatives refused to name. This wasn't about intent. It was about impact. At best, the dynamic was unhealthy. At worst, it was a slow-burn disaster, waiting for the right spark. The mother read those responses late at night, heart racing, second-guessing everything. Then she looked at her daughter, finally acting her age again, and the doubt eased. Sometimes protection doesn't look kind. Sometimes it looks like separation. Sometimes being a good parent means being willing to be misunderstood. She didn't wait for proof of harm. She listened to the warning. The laugh hit her before the punchline did. It wasn't kind laughter. It was sharp, crowded, the kind that swells a room and makes you feel smaller with every second. She stood near the back of the bar, half hidden by a sticky high, watching her boyfriend pace the stage like he always did when he thought he was killing. He sounded confident, relaxed, too. Relaxed, then a sentence landed that didn't belong to him. It belonged to her, not the words exactly. The shape of them, the ache behind them, a joke about needing constant reassurance, a bit about panic when people pull away, a casual, throwaway line about growing up with someone who always left. Her chest tightened. That story was told in a therapist's office. Low voice, tissue in hand. Door closed. That story had never been meant for a microphone. The crowd roared. He kept going. Each joke peeled something else open. He mimicked insecurity, turned fear into timing, packaged loneliness into a rhythm that made strangers slap tables and spill drinks. She stood frozen, her mind racing ahead while her body lagged behind. Is he really doing this? He was, and he knew exactly what he was doing. By the time he finished, she didn't feel sad. She felt exposed, like someone had turned the lights on without warning. Backstage, smelled like sweat and stale beer. He came off buzzing, eyes bright, feeding on the afterglow. He leaned in for a kiss. She didn't return. Her voice surprised her with how steady it sounded when she spoke. She told him she recognized the material. Told him it wasn't vague. Told him those weren't universal observations. They were hers. His smile thinned. He shrugged it off. said pain is universal, said comedians pull from real life, said she was being dramatic, too sensitive. If she couldn't handle it, maybe she shouldn't date an artist. Each word landed wrong. Not loud, not angry, just dismissive enough to twist the knife. She waited for remorse. It didn't come. What came instead was a lecture about creative freedom, about how nothing is sacred if it gets a laugh, about how she should be proud she inspired something that worked. That's when it shifted. Not heartbreak, clarity. She realized he hadn't crossed a line by accident. He'd measured it. He'd stepped over it because he didn't think it mattered, because he didn't think she'd leave. She did. No screaming exit, no dramatic scene, just the quiet act of walking out while the bar reset for the next act. The jokes echoed behind her, hollow now, like laughter recorded in the wrong room. Later, alone, the feeling settled into something sharp and clean. She didn't miss him, she missed the version of herself who thought being understood was the same as being safe. The next morning, she blocked his number. Not out of anger, out of self-respect. Some people turn wounds into art. Others turn people into material. She knew the difference now. The room laughed, and no one noticed the girl stop smiling. That was how it always began. A spotlight, a microphone, a familiar voice turning her body into a punchline before she was old enough to understand why it hurt. The audience loved it. The timing, the confidence, the way he owned the stage at home. She learned to disappear. She grew up hearing her name paired with jokes about size, appetite, self-control. Not once, not accidentally. Over and over, until strangers knew her shape better than her dreams. Applause trained her ears. Laughter taught her a lesson she never asked for. If they're laughing, it must be true. She learned early how to be smaller without leaving the room. How to fold inward. How to count, bites, calories, steps, rules. Control became comfort. Hunger became proof she was doing something right. Years later, a hygienist noticed the signs during an appointment. Erosion, damage that didn't match the patient's age. A body quietly fighting itself. The story spilled out in fragments. Pauses filling the spaces where words felt too heavy. There had been clinics, relapses, promises, a tug-of-war between starving and purging that never ended cleanly. Each time she tried to climb out, the echoes followed her. Old laughter, still ringing. The turning point didn't come with drama. It arrived quietly, like exhaustion, deciding it was done. One final collapse. One hospital room that felt too late even as doctors rushed. She didn't make it. Only then did the man with the microphone go silent. He showed up afterward, wrecked and hollow, asking for forgiveness as if timing were negotiable. As if remorse could rewind years. As if apologies could reach someone who had learned far too young that love sometimes laughs while it hurts you. The hygienist told the story years later, voice steady but eyes distant. Not to accuse, not to shame, just to warn. Words don't vanish after the laugh fades. Stages don't absolve damage. And children don't forget what they're taught to hate about themselves. Some jokes end the moment the crowd stops clapping. Others don't end at all. He loved the check arriving almost as much as the date itself. Every dinner ended the same way. A smooth reach, a confident smile, a card placed down before she could react. It wasn't generosity, it was performance. He liked being seen as the man who handled things, the man who paid, the man who provided. At first, she didn't question it. He was older, established, comfortable reminding the world of it. The way he talked about money carried a quiet expectation. If he spent, he mattered more. If he paid, he led. She noticed the pattern before she named it. He chose places where the bill arrived heavy. He joked about people who split checks. He enjoyed the moment servers looked at him, not her. It felt harmless, almost flattering. Until one conversation snapped the illusion. They were talking casually, planning weeks ahead. She mentioned an upcoming family trip, the kind of detail you drop without thinking. A private flight, long planned, paid for by her stepmother. No flex, just part of her life. The air shifted. He laughed, but it landed wrong. His eyes narrowed just enough to notice. Questions followed, stacked too quickly. How often does your family do that? Why didn't you mention it before? Must be nice. The warmth drained out of his voice and left something sharp behind. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't curiosity. This was recalculation. From that moment on, everything changed. Messages slowed. Compliments thinned out. He stopped offering plans and started probing instead. Where she stayed, who paid. What else she hadn't told him? She felt it clearly then. The thing he enjoyed wasn't spending money. It was being the ceiling. Once he realized he wasn't, the room collapsed. A few days later, he vanished. No argument. No explanation. Just silence where attention used to be. The card stopped coming out. So did he. At first, she replayed the last conversation, searching for the mistake. Then the pattern lined up cleanly. He hadn't left because he was intimidated. He left because he couldn't dominate the narrative anymore, online. Strangers said what she already knew but hadn't admitted. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a dependent, someone whose lifestyle bent around his wallet, someone impressed by access he controlled. Once that control disappeared, so did his interest. The irony settled in slowly. Then, all at once, the man who loved paying couldn't afford equality. She didn't feel abandoned. She felt clarified. Some people don't leave because you're too much. They leave because you were never small enough.